but it's not.
And it's really not that difficult because
Other than people
basically,
who are teaching
or at least I
classes.
found most of the courses that are so
FFPs, they'll
hands-on
probably
learning
back off
anyway.
those. That's
You
all. We
do
got
the
one
parts
class
that are
for this.
required, so,
Right.
you know, that's just part of it
Probably,
anyway.
like, for example,
Yeah,
for
that's
performance,
fine.
For me to start.
will probably would be intermediate, that
So we're really
that's
paying
the
from here
NTSU
to
dance
fall.
theater.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah.
We're so glad you're here. I'm Laura Clark, College of Education and Interim Director, Center for Educational Media. This is Dr. Mary Evans, and she's in College of Liberal Arts. She's the guru. I'm the a support person here. But we are here to, very happy all of you are here because that tells us you're interested in this topic, which we've been working on a while. Mary has been working on it since, in this area with ADP and since 2009. And I came in about 2011 or 12 or so, around that time. Before we get started, I want to know who is here, where you're coming from, and in one word, why are you here? So let's begin here. If you'll, your name and college.
Okay, my name is Jill. I'm a graduate student at professional science, major in biostatistics.
Great. Biostatistics?
Yeah,
Okay. So glad you're here. And your first name again?
Jill.
Jed?
Yes,
Welcome.
thank you.
Mel Homan, I'm at Communication Studies,
Okay.
Organizational Communication, but I'm also a student in the ASLI program at the Education.
Okay, yeah. I just missed knowing you. So,
Oh,
so
we'll have to remedy that.
maybe so. Glad you're here. So you're faculty and student.
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
And I'm L'Oreal Stevens, and I'm in Comm Studies and Orco as well.
Okay.
And teaching conflict and communication and the intro speech class.
All right, great.
I'm Pat Ritchie, I'm also in their department.
Yes.
Cost Orco, and I enjoy EXL and civic learning projects with my students. And I'm the debate coach, so we do a lot of community-based work. So all of this
Absolutely.
stuff.
I sense a new civic energy and communications over here. So this is
It's
good.
an election year.
Yes, exactly. That's what we've been talking about.
I too am in comm studies and
Yes.
organizational communication. It's the corner. We've got
Uh-huh.
a corner on the market here.
Uh-huh.
And I teach fundamentals.
And your name?
Kristen Naylor.
Kristen, okay. Great.
I'm Michelle Edie. I work in community and university partnerships.
Yes.
I'm actually here on my own because I'm a doctoral student also. And so I figure regardless of which way this goes, this will be great information.
I agree. And you've taken a civic initiative is what you've done to be here. And you have framed it in a way.
What program are you with?
Community and university partnerships.
Okay, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm Meg Brooker.
Yes.
I teach in the dance program. I teach dance technique and
Yes,
history and theory.
yes.
And I was really interested because I think we already do a lot of these things, and I didn't know that there were buzzwords or it was
Yes.
it was something to kind of think about in that way.
We're going to
So,
give names for what
Yes.
you're doing.
Yes. I
Okay.
thought that would be helpful.
Because there are civic elements of dance. Dr. Evans?
And then maybe we can do it better
Absolutely.
once we've named what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Kevin Granbuel, and I'm a professor in the ALSI Assessment, Learning, and School Improvement Program in the College of Ed.
Yes. So glad you're here, Kevin, as a fellow College of Edder. So glad you're here.
Carol Swayze, and I'm with the Experiential Learning Program, and
Yes.
so I'm always here to learn what we're doing.
And she's one of our supporters in this too. Glad you're here, Carol.
I'm Vanessa Leffler. I'm in the Department of Political Science and International Relations, and I'm always just here to brainstorm new ideas for
Okay.
innovating my teaching.
All right, great, great. All right, so Mary's gonna take it here, but we need to know who is here because we're gonna work together in teams a couple times while we're here today, according to our shared disciplines.
And before we
So,
nestle
Mary?
in, I want to do this cluster thing. So we have got a serious comm section over here. Is that
Yes.
that's 4 of you or more?
Or
4. And so I'm trying to think.
I'm thinking we may get the grad students together here. right here, either to move over here, or if you could move over here, how about that? Okay.
And poli-sci and dance, how about that combination?
Sounds good. Here, I can sit.
And Ed, of course, could just go anywhere. We've got what our clusters are. And Carol represents every.
Experiential learning and education fit
All
nicely
right,
together.
that's what we've got. All righty, that will be our sort of breakout cluster set, and we can go bigger or smaller than that as we need to. I want to give you the 2-minute history and overview of this work that we do, and basically to give you some of my biases and prejudices right up front, to let you know that we've been doing civic learning as a concept on this campus for a really long time. Obviously, it seems to all emanate from the poli-sci department, but what became very evident to folks decades back, this was really post my generation, so we were all about the changing the world, but there seemed to be, I guess, and as a historian, because that's a discipline I come from, I can really view this as post Watergate, the national cynicism, wherever you want to put the point. But the reality is, I think there got to be this period of time about 3 or 4 decades ago when people were saying that the young people were not voting and they were instead spending all their money and time at the mall buying really expensive Adidas or whatever the shoe of du jour was at that period of time. And so much so that folks in higher education began to do a lot of self-examination and say, we have gotten exceedingly subdisciplinized within higher ed. We are very much blinders on, focused on advancement and elevation within our own specific academic disciplines, to the point that maybe we've forgotten what our larger purpose is. And if you go to think about it, the larger purpose has been there all along. I mean, you can go back to looking at the early formation of public education systems to really understand what we were about. But in the Truman post-World War II era, there was obviously fighting communism was one of our objectives. But if you sort of take a historic glance back to say that education is about the realization of democracy in every phase of its living, and education for the application of creative imagination and trained intelligence to be solutions to social problems and to the administration of public affairs, and that has to be one of the goals and purposes of higher education. I don't know, somewhere along the line that seemed to have gotten lost. During the exact same period of time, Congress formed the National Conference on Citizenship, which still exists. Weirdly enough, I had nothing to do with it and didn't know much about it until quite a number of years ago. And we at MTSU have become quite disengaged from it. So there are a lot of these structures that exist out there. But what really motivated us at MTSU to get on board with this objective was when the realities of what was happening in higher ed came to large numbers of people across the United States, and they began coming together back in the 1990s, what's called the Wingspread Report, which was looking at higher ed and saying, these are the defined areas of problem. Certainly Campus Compact began 30 years ago this year, as a matter of fact, to talk about service learning would be a way to re-engage our young people in our classes, to allow them to do public service, which would no doubt engage them. At MTSU, when we got on board with what was a national initiative through the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, that is ASCU, ASCU asked every provost and every president to undertake an academic initiative that would create an opportunity for civic learning across the disciplines in every department, in every college, in every program within the university. And that was back in 2003. And our MTSU provost was at that national meeting of provosts and presidents who discussed it with ASCU and brought the initiative back here. It was about the time that we were working on, I wasn't here at the time, but so I'm told, we were working on the QEP of that era. And the QEP basically created Carol's position, which is experiential learning. We opted to not use the word at MTSU service learning, that term, because we wanted it even more encompassing and so that it could be used for many purposes. And the EXL program and American Democracy Project were brought to campus precisely at the same time, and that was really with 2005. And the objective, working under the Office of the Provost at that point in time, was to be intentional and to institutionalize efforts within the university that would create opportunities for civic learning across the disciplines in every class, in every course, in every department, in every college. How are we doing 10 years later? How intentional are we being, and how much have we institutionalized this? What we really have tended to do over the years is tie our university's higher ed civic purpose into things that we can assess and measure, because that's what we as academicians do very well. So even though some schools have really heavily focused on their campus compact connection through service learning, and we have developed through Carol and her predecessor, the EXL program here, and we have a lot of high impact practices that have developed learning communities that have grown, and we know those are powerful. We've created faculty learning communities within our university to help provide these support systems for faculty to move forward in so many of these areas. So high impact practices, that's exceedingly important, and the question gets to be, which high impact practices are you using? If you want to pass those out, Laura. The high impact practice, Tennessee Board of Regents, of course, has its list. We have a list that we're passing around from NESE, the National Survey of Student Engagement. They're all of a piece. They are about the same sort of thing. We try to do as many as we can. Here's what we do know now, because we've had years of study of how we implement high impact practices within any university system, is that it's very developmental. We all tend to start with one change, one humble, simple change, something that we think we can do. And we do the best we can with that. We implement it, and we hope, cross our fingers, that it has had a positive input into our students. But what the studies are telling us now, chronologically over time, is that when you also employ within your own classes a second high impact practice, you get a bigger bang for your effort. And if you actually employ a third one, you get an even bigger bang. So we know quantitatively there is something about massive input into our students. I mean, what do we not know already about this? It's how much blood do I have to give to every one of these kids in all of my classes, because they can suck every ounce of energy out of us in the course of a day, but we can never give too much. But then, if we're doing them, are we keeping our eye on the prize? Are we focusing on what our bigger, longer term objectives are and should be? Because unless we remember what the 3 C's of higher education are, we sort of lose sight of the bigger picture. In the state of Tennessee, here's where we are heavily focused right now, because college is the curriculum piece. It has to do with college completion, the College Completion Act of 2010 for us, everything that has to do with our refinancing and restructuring within the university and through the Tennessee Board of Regents. That's been imperative. It's been imperative that we stay heavily focused on that curriculum piece, and for us in our own individual disciplines, that's very often where we get stuck. We're certainly all about the tenure and promotion, and we're all about the publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and we're all about going to the national meetings and getting higher visibility, and often as we become more and more and more refined into our own academic excellence, we step back from figuring out what the heck we're supposed to be doing within our classrooms with our students.
I'll step in here. This triangle right here, looking through a lens of pedagogy, this represents what we call authentic learning, because authentic learning is learning that is real and real world and applicable to the student's own life. So if we can frame the learning experience at college in terms of, the college itself, how it will impact and prepare them for career, and what meaningful learning can we acquire that can allow us to have an impact on our world. So the college experience, impact on future career, and impact on the world around us. And this is the piece we'll be talking about today. And you know, one reason they adopted experiential learning as opposed to service, that's a pedagogy term. And we are an institution of higher ed. Experiential learning is a way of teaching. So I propose that's why they did it. Go ahead.
Well, we basically have provided for you a copy of the Crucible Moment, which is really sort of it was published in 2012, so it's a few years old right now. But it is the primer, the handbook, the collection, where the 21st century thinking is and historically where it came from. So a lot of the slides that I'm going to put up here are totally, completely stolen from this book. But I wanted you each to go back with a copy of this because even if you do nothing more than read the first chapter, it is a very potent document. And then the folks who published it are AAC and you, not our ASCU, but the American Association of Colleges and Universities, which is very much into its monthly publications on diversity and democracy. But AAC&U is a driver of civic learning nationally through not only the public higher education system, but the private higher education system as well. And more recently, Carol McTighe-Musel, who is one of its major education directors and who's really responsible for a great deal of the Crucible Moment, has culled down a lot of what's in there into this document, which I am also providing you, which is a mere 23 some odd pages. But I think it's a nice little gelling together of some key ideas of hers, and I offer this to you as well because I think it's exceedingly useful. And just, you know, as you have an opportunity to, maybe not within this hour, but other times, please be sure and take a look at what she has to say. I did not put up here on this slide, and perhaps I should have, as a slide on page 18 of the civic prompts. These are some of the AAC&U high impact practices that Carol Musel is highlighting, and she talks about that the first 6 of these do not necessarily have civic outcomes unless we are intentional in our teaching that way. First year seminars, undergraduate research, intensive writing, common intellectual experiences, capstone courses or culminating projects and internships, and we all do these and we advocate this stuff for our students and we work with them to get there. But again, unless you approach each of these sorts of assignments from a civic purpose and with a civic objective, you can miss the civic component of that altogether. The second 6, says Carol Musel, do have inevitable civic outcomes that can be intensified. Many ways I would query whether that is necessarily the case, because I also think that unless you deal with service learning or community-based learning, diversity training, global studies, study abroad, learning communities, and collaborative learning from an expressly civic purpose, from an intentionally civic purpose, I would also proffer that you could probably miss the point of those as well. And that, because what often happens with a lot of these more experiential processes is that they can be exceedingly transformative, and if the faculty member is doing his or her best to do the reflective writing, that is part of what our EXL program is, it causes there to be that metacognitive learning that allows the student to think, what am I learning and why am I doing this? And in those sorts of questions moves the discussion forward. But again, you can almost do all of this without having an inherently civic purpose if you're if you don't really structure your entire program according to those premises. So the question would be then, what is a civic purpose and how can we integrate it into our course? Do we feel as though not only teaching for our students' economic development, which is also critically important, both of these pieces to TBR and to us, that if we do this civic piece, have we somehow or another betrayed our department? Are we not doing what we should professionally to get ahead with our own careers? Do we think that if we talk to our students about the common good and that we are educating ourselves not only for our own monetary development and our own professional futures, but we're educating ourselves in order to make a contribution to the world around us. That part of the purpose of our being as a human being on the face of this earth is to make a contribution. Do we teach them expressly that democracy is under construction, that it is not something that's a given, but it is in constant renovation, and that we and they are an inherent part of that process? We do it through civil discourse, we do it through respectability and respectable interaction. And there was a wonderful article by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that came out in the Washington Post just yesterday, I don't know if any of you all saw it, about the fact that so much of the phraseology and vocabulary in this presidential campaign has been putting down being politically correct. And Abdul-Jabbar was making the point that quite the contrary, we need to have a great deal of political correctness, because in our kindness with one another and in our civil discourse with one another and in our respect of each other, we are enhancing the Constitution and our shared American purpose. And that, in fact, if we do otherwise, we are undermining. And I thought it was a very nice statement coming from one of our professional athletes. So indeed, to be able to allow ourselves to include this component piece within our own coursework is a challenge, I think, when we don't necessarily approach our disciplines other than poli-sci from that perspective. But let's take a look at what this might entail. And so what Laura is passing around right now is a sheet for each of you to take, and I want to go into a silent mode for about 3 minutes and ask you to take out a pen or a yellow highlighter or a marker or a pencil or something, and just look at these examples of what a civic framework for the 21st century and how civic learning and democratic engagement could be forwarded within your courses and your discipline. And basically circle, what do you do in your class that advances civic knowledge, civic skills, civic values, and collective action? What do you currently do? And then maybe mark in another way what you really could do now that you've thought about it. And then just scratch through the ones that really are not applicable to your discipline. We'll take about 3 minutes for you to do this. Is everybody about there? Okay, Margaret, you're such a wonderful outlier. Jump in on this. What are you already doing from?
I think we do almost everything.
Share with us.
I would say that under knowledge, the first bullet point is something that we do indirectly, you know, I teach dance history, so I'm essentially teaching history. So we're, you know, teaching that, you know, there were performing artists who were active in the women's suffrage movement. There are, you know, dancers and theater practitioners and artists who've largely responded to probably most democratic movements and revolutions and shifts in government. So we're not teaching government, we're not teaching government policy, but we definitely teach how government policy affects people's lives. We talk a lot about bodies, we talk about policing of the body, we talk about respect for yourself and self-awareness in space and how to be spatially related to other people. We do a lot of ensemble building work. We do a lot of collaborative creative work. So in kind of an abstract way, we address a lot of those principles, and we talk about diversity a lot. We're very lucky to be, you know, on a very diverse campus too, so we can actually, you know, have some pretty direct conversations in the classroom, and we talk about representation, because the choices that we're making to put bodies on stage in a performance space will read a specific way to different audiences. We talk about awareness of audience. So, you know, we're not necessarily directly relating.
How about in the justice, equality, ethics branch?
We talk about yeah, I mean, I think some of those themes come through, you know, when we talk about particular artworks and representation. We just had 2 students who created a work for the NAACP event this month. They performed that work for our open house, which was a recruitment initiative where we had 50 potential high school dance students come. They were working with you know, strange fruit, and you know, they are aware that Pro Primus choreographed that, and you know, almost, you know, probably 75, 80 years ago. So they're working with an awareness of a lot of those topics.
And is that true when they're not in dance history, but they're in the actual physical?
In the studio,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, in my classes, they are, and that's partly because I came out of a graduate program that talked a lot about citizenship and civic responsibility, and so the idea of incorporating, you know, these kinds of ideas and values into a critical pedagogy was part of my graduate training.
Wow, that was inherent.
Yeah, so I can't say that that's true across like all of our adjuncts, because I'm not sure, and I'm kind of new here, but I have 2 full-time colleagues, and we all, you know, kind of come from a similar place in terms of an awareness of those values.
Kevin, which of the ed departments are you in?
Well, I'm in the EDD program in assessment learning and school improvement. I have taught 2 courses in the ed leadership department, and so one of those fits perfectly here. So in terms of giving a quick kind of response to the top one, the under knowledge, familiarity with key democratic texts, universal democratic principles, selected debates. In a course I taught this fall, issues and trends in teaching and learning. I requested my big stack of constitutions from the American Democracy Project, and we brought those into the course. Brought in some of the issues about legal context in terms of how that impacts educational policies, and explored those and tried to ground it back to the Constitution. And where does that fit in there for us? So we had some fun with that. Within the program I teach myself there, the program that I'm fully focused in there, assessment, learning, and school improvement. I just picked one on the far right side there, the collective action, the integration of knowledge, skills, and examined values to inform actions taken in concert with other people. All of our coursework our cohorts are based out in schools, and we want them to change the world now, is kind of the joking way that Rick Benosdal and I kind of use it, and I think Julie does as well. But they'll take what we're talking about and try to make an applied project to do something now. So it's not just a matter of let's put these ideas, let's put them to practice and try to make an impact and then share what we found from that. So there'd be 2 quick examples I'd give within my venue as well as the other one I've engaged in.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback on that. He mentioned a word that I've spent some extended time developing, and that is policy. Every discipline has public policy that affects what you do when you enter the career or when you enter higher education. And if we do not spend time training our students on how to be aware of public policy development, how to find the source of public policy, how to impact public policy development, then we are missing a prime civic opportunity. Because policy takes a little longer. We can't change it now. But this morning, my undergrad and future math and science teachers were complaining about something. I said, okay, so here's what you need to do. You need to find out who's making the rules on this, how can we change it, who do we need to talk to, and how can we become informed on it. So, is there arts policy? Well, yes. Is there funding of arts policy? So that's the policy for arts. Sometimes. Lack of funding? Is there policy in higher education? Yes. Policy in education? Oh my gosh, yes. Help me in communications. What kind of policy would we be talking about? Public policy that would impact the work. Because what comes to mind, to me, just from hearing your comments in organizations, there are HR policies that govern how we speak to employees, how we speak to each other, how we conduct meetings, how we articulate things to avoid harassment, to avoid discrimination. And to me, that's a communication skill that we must develop and have that in the back of our mind.
Plus, we also create, like I'm looking through these on the 2 courses I teach, and we do every single one of them except ability to communicate in multiple languages. We try, we have debates with groups in Afghanistan, and we teach classes on intercultural communication and whatnot, so we're very aware of it, we just don't do it.
Right.
Because that's a different department. But I mean, I'm looking at all this stuff, and part of what we teach in communication is the ability to deconstruct all of this as a communicator. From the very beginning, COM 2200, which is the basic public speaking class everybody's got to take.
Yes.
Through our majors is you have to deconstruct society in order to be able to communicate in society and then communicate properly depending on your social situation.
Well, we all need that. We all need to take that.
These are the civil discourse people over
yes.
here.
But if you want to have any more conversations about brainstorming about policy, call me. Because that's a particular area that I did some of my doc work in and I have interest in.
What others of you all in COM have to say about this list of things that you, other than avoiding multiple languages, out of pragmatic?
I think we probably all, but I can't speak for all of us, approach our course from a principle-based perspective. And so a lot of these principles are incorporated in every lecture and discussion and evaluation.
Do you approach, I mean, obviously in debate you're doing this all the time, Patrick, but it is, big questions like, or big problems that the class would solve, feed the world, fuel the world. What are some of the big questions that courses can be framed around such that it keeps the students operating at this sort of highest level of abstraction?
Use a debate term called link. You link in why it's important to them. What's it matter what's happening in Africa until you realize that all the rare earth minerals in your smartphone come from Africa. So it has a direct tie to you, or the amount of money your government is spending either on aid or military interaction in those countries in Africa have a direct correlation. Or if your kids go into the military, or you get drafted because you happen to be an 18-year-old male, probably soon to be 18-year-old female, now all of a sudden it's important to you. So it's always trying to tie that back to them and saying this is important because of the greater picture of things. Yes. And then you're a part of that conversation. Like that's one thing about COM that's really good is It's always about the conversation. Like Chrissy was saying, we start off with freedom, respect for freedom and human dignity, because you can't even communicate if you don't understand those principles. But there's no point in even talking if you aren't willing to compromise.
Kevin?
One that I always try to build into most of my courses, obviously the framing of education, but what's the purpose of education? And I think so many times we kind of are in the midst of it and we're just saying, well, I'm gonna do this because it's kind of the way it has been. I like to take a step back and let's, take the roof off as it is. Let's think about what about those worldviews, and it kind of underscores, I think it's the third bullet point you guys have left, the knowledge, but kind of taking a step away and what's Alan Alda's old phrase there, wipe off your windows every once in a while, or your assumptions. They're your windows on the world, and trying to kind of pull back first. Let's think about what assumptions we have before, because when we come into politics to dealing with these issues, often we're grounded where we are, and so we're speaking from that vantage point. Let's think big picture here. What's our driving purpose, and then how does this fit in with that? And if it doesn't, how we might improve that. So it kind of constantly gives us a vantage point of thinking about where we want to go. So we have that lighthouse in the distance instead of just kind of going with whatever way the wind blows us.
Yeah, I'm sure I mispronounced your name. Is it biology that's your department?
Kind of biostatistics.
Your biostatistics, right? How does this apply to you?
I think with the skills, we use like critical inquiry analysis, also like a quantitative reasoning, or like gather information. Also the policy, we have we have to take like IRB.
Yes.
So if you do like human subject something, you have to, I think, pass that test. Also, you also need keep some confidential the data for the human. That's I think about.
Do you think any of that work in your field moves into the
Yeah, the
values?
values. For example, we have like open mind, justice, like integrity. So we have to be object, not subject. Depend the data, we can get concluded. We couldn't say, oh, we want something. So normally we do hypothesis tests, according to data, we get conclusion. Not you just think.
In biostatistics, are you all lone rangers, or do you operate in collective action?
Yeah, I think that's all applied.
So, Vanessa, circling back to poli-sci, where all this, obviously, from which it emanates. I mean, I think I carry with me, and no doubt it is a deep-seated prejudice or lack of information, where I presume the poli-sci department is always in this sort of ho-hum, rolling its eyes, like, seriously, really?
I don't think so.
No.
I also, my area of specialization is international relations. So for me, a lot of these social movements that would happen at the domestic level don't come into my classes, because that's not the level that I'm working with. I'm working, at the level of, well, why is it that, the United States and Iran get a nuclear agreement at this time and not some other time? And then to think about, so then democracy is a much more abstract idea than I think the way that this system is engaging it. But then of course that's what we have comparative politics in American government for, is that they're kind of aggregating all of these things. So I wouldn't automatically assume that just because it's a political science class that we're doing all of these things. That's kind of the first thing to get out of the way, that we're all participating in this civic engagement type thing all the time. But I think the more you study social movements, the more you understand that in order to resolve these collective action problems, it's about organizing large numbers of people, and how do you reach them, and how do you convince them to participate in these things. And it's not just the political discourse that actually persuades someone to take a day off of work and show up at a protest in order to demonstrate to their government they're dissatisfied. You know, it has to be, you know, a persuasive argument, and it has to be an argument that touches on, you know, something intrinsic to human nature, and that's where art comes in. So I'm actually not all that surprised that, you know, all of my colleagues here are finding the connections, because, you know, the more you study social movements, the more you realize it's not just that we're political animals, but that we're social animals, but we need to be persuaded. And, you know, the economic incentives of protest and, you know, dissent against our governments is not, you know, it's really costly. It's not like something we're just inclined to do all the time. So, and just being told what democracy is not sufficient. We have to be moved.
Yeah. That sparks a thought that engaging in this activity of civil learning and civic discourse costs something, whether you invest in it, but it also costs if you don't.
There was, we video recorded Constitution Day and voter registration. And Secretary of State Trey Hargett, at Mary's invitation, was here on campus. And we got him on video, having talked to a student about voter registration. The student responded to Secretary of State, I don't do politics. And the Secretary of State replied, politics will do you if you don't do politics. And so I think that's,
yeah, that's like I was gonna bring up when we were talking about how do we convince students that, you know, the things that they engage with on a daily basis are part of politics. My problem is the exact opposite. So I have students who are very passionate about a political subject, and I have to tell them, like, well, why should anyone else care about that? Your passion may be important to you, but how do you make that relevant for someone else? Why should anyone else care about, you know, human trafficking? Why should anyone else care about, you know, how the drug trade in Colombia is, you know, depriving, you know, certain humans, certain groups of people from kind of self-actualization? Why should anyone else care about that? I'm glad that you do, but so that's, I have the opposite problem all the time of getting them to ground it back down and like think about, well, why, you know, how are my ideals, my lofty values, things I'm passionate about, like become something that rallies other people and persuades them that maybe this is something that policy should be addressing, and, you know, why anyone else should, you know, want their tax dollars to go to that program.
Carol and Michelle, as administrative types, do y'all want to jump in on this from your perspectives?
Well, I do teach one service learning course, so we do talk, there's a lot of these that we do, but under knowledge, mostly we're looking at because I'm teaching a service learning course for the Expanding Your Horizons conference for the girls. So it's about girls and how they are, usually by the time they're in 5th grade or by middle school, they're already at a disadvantage compared to boys because of the math and science skills are already limited less at that point. They've either not been encouraged, they've not been pushed, or they didn't see the value or something. So those kind of issues. So we're looking at the bigger picture and how it impacts girls and women in the future in the STEM fields. So we do look at some of that under knowledge and how they all fit into the world, and they do research and they look at how policies in the past have impacted and what needs to happen in order to make it where more girls will graduate or more girls will go into the sciences, and how important it is that it's not just science and not just communication, because we have to have it all. You could be a great scientist, and if you can't communicate, then you're still not going to be a complete whole person. Or if you're excellent at communicating but you don't understand your scientists and all the other colleagues in the STEM fields, how important that is. So we kind of look at that too as a whole picture. And then the students go back and do a lot of different kinds of research, and we bring that in and talk about that so that we're preparing them. The goal of the course is to do the conference, But we do the background work, and then, you know, we talk about those kind of things as we go through and as we prepare and do the things we have to do to make the conference happen. So the skills, they do get most of the skills, they get most of the values, because we're talking about how important all of this is. And sometimes I have men in the class, and that's really cool, because then they can bring in the perspective. This last time I had one, and he was talking about, yes, my mother was a single parent, she was a scientist, I know all the struggles and everything that she went through.
It's very important to have men and women's issues, discussions.
It was wonderful.
It's always important to have multiple perspectives.
So, so we bring all that into that one service learning class, and then the goal at the end is to put on the conference and make it a success, and make all those young middle and high school girls that come in excited about learning more about math and science.
Michelle, how about you?
Actually, when I was looking at this, I was thinking back to teaching University 1010, which is our freshman seminar, and also being an undergrad poli-sci major. Some of these things kind of come naturally to me, but I kind of wanted to focus in on the values piece, because for a lot of our freshmen coming in, this is their first experience where they actually have to deal with a good measure of any type of diversity. And so just being able to model and remind students of, you know, the importance of tolerance and being open-minded and how they treat their classmates and everything. So even though these, I guess, ideals may not be part of the actual syllabus, I think any decent 1010 instructor is going to really have to touch on a lot of these, you know, during the course of the semester.
So that was what I wrote down in my notes. It's like some of these things come by like classroom norms, just like what is an appropriate way to engage each other, and that's separate from like specific content lesson, because that's the thing that comes up in political science courses is not. I mean, we get the content, we get the passion, the people who care about policy, but they also have significant disagreements, and they don't know how. They haven't been forced to, or they haven't been trained to really talk to each other civilly, and that's, you know, a lot. And especially since I do the IR classes, like, you know, it's having to talk seriously about, you know, Islam in the world, and that could be very challenging for some of the students in my class, having to talk about, you know, the origins of terrorism, and, you know, it's very uncomfortable for them, and they can get kind of angry and you know, sometimes hostile, and then it's finding a way to diffuse it, because you're right, like, if you've not been trained to, like, you know, been exposed to how to talk to people with different opinions or different identities, it's a new challenge.
The very fundamental basis for any civil society is the premise for need for civil discourse in order to have an exchange of different points of view, and that is a fundamental principle of academics and the open inquiry method. So in this way, teaching for political engagement, civic engagement, however you wish to phrase it, is a component of civic learning, and it is fundamental to being a university professor in its most straightforward way. So as you're looking at this framework sheet, obviously, it's easier for us to pick out the ones that we're already doing. Then the question is, can you highlight ones that maybe you could make a more intentional, direct point of including if you have not previously? Which then leads us to the next handout that Laura's going to give you, which is sort of a campus discussion guide. I came from a discussion yesterday when the groups in the workshop were being divided up according to their roles on campus, sort of the presidents and provosts of institutional decision makers versus administrators versus faculty and staff versus students in the room. And I've left all the questions in those categories, but I think we're going to really approach this from the perspective of hone into the faculty and staff sets of questions, but I'm happy for you to have all the others and sort of let those be provocative, something for you to think about. And here's where I thought it would be smart for you all to have these little subgroups that we've created and just talk about under faculty and staff really what those first two questions are, which is, you know, read them, discuss them on yourself, and have somebody be the report back person after about 3 minutes. What are the civic lines of inquiry in your discipline? that your discipline is already doing? What are the civic purposes in your discipline? How are they defined, and how can you be more clear about the civic purposes of your discipline as you think about teaching for civic learning moving forward?
Questions 1 and 2.
Yeah, take some notes and have a little shared discussion.
Students, yeah, if you can't.
I will say, like, we have our student learning outcomes, like, we exclude the collective experiences as one of our categories, I will say that. Not because, not because we don't believe it's. Yeah. I know, all of our student outcomes are created around knowledge, skills, and values, and we've excluded collective experiences.
I just,
I will say,
that's what I need to do.
I mean, that works. Products are really
I'm not sure if I can
very
do the fair answer for the college of ed. I'd say
This is interesting, because I would say that, you know, probably in my field, you know, I mean, knowledge, skills, and collective experiences. I think values probably depend, values probably depend more on.
Yeah, exactly.
So that piece would be.
That would be embedded in everything we do.
For sure. That's almost a choice.
Yeah.
Choosing to come in,
Yeah.
you know, with
Experiential
a
learning
desire
based
that, you know, maybe.
Well, and that's going to be
Yeah, it's very usually.
Although I will say,
Yeah.
And so for us, we're both content and methodology.
Yeah.
So, we're outside a lot of where, like,
I was teaching at K-12 school.
where we take away projects.
Right, right.
Not a curricular integration, you know, those are using dances that we use to explore.
When this happens to me,
It was a government class.
like
So
it did
in all
yesterday,
of those
being
things,
first,
it's
by me, I feel.
you know, it's like taking a situation.
It's a little more subtle.
Yeah, when people say that you're doing that, it's very much
Without
by
the-
people. Yeah, aware of itself.
Yeah.
But not every value.
Yeah.
I've got a student waiting in line.
Like,
Yeah.
No, yeah. That was it.
You know, because that's the most, that challenge kind of makes me Western.
Yeah.
You know.
So y'all,
Yeah.
since we're on a time marker here, just to say, as we move forward at MTSU, and we consider what would a civic-minded campus look like, if that is the objective for higher education, if we should have a shared civic purpose for this university beyond the economic benefit and beyond the college completion, but looking for the whole student, so that we know that every student who graduates from Middle Tennessee State University goes out into the world prepared for social responsibility, societal action, and knowing what his or her role is in a participatory democracy. We have to have a civic ethos that governs campus life. There has to be civic literacy for every student as a goal across every discipline. There needs to be civic inquiry that's integrated into every discipline within the university. And then an understanding that civic action is in fact an American way of living, and that it's part of creating the participatory democracy around us. So with that in mind, when it comes back to how we as academicians operate within the university in our fields, what's the public purpose of my field, of my particular discipline?
What do you have to say about that? Communications?
It's pretty easy, it's just our name, communication.
Just our name.
If you, even if you have the greatest concepts, if you can't communicate them, especially in a persuasive democracy, i.e. a representative democracy, not really any good. You've got to be able to communicate on all the different levels, the interpersonal, intercultural, rhetorical. It has to be part of the process.
It's foundational to the system. Communication.
What's the civic purpose of biostatistics?
Yeah, I really just thought, with, like, how can I say, like, we have some data to make a policy maker to, get what policy they can make or what policy should be changed. For example, we do the cancer immunology. If we see, we have some data, we know, we know this cancer should be screened for specific people. So that's a policy. Also for FDA, when they approve the drug, they need data from clinical trials. So we also need to get some data to see, this drug is good or not. So that's all.
Michelle, the public purpose in your work?
And, well, I guess in the way my career is kind of designed, I'm more like a Pied Piper for post-secondary education. So it's my job to go out and get people to come and partner with us, whether it's from a business and industry perspective, or whether it's bringing adult learners back to school, or whatever, bringing people into the fold. And I think the energy behind that will be, we're bringing them to the right place, right? And so once they're here, then they will be able to, I guess, have access to everything we're talking about today.
And it's layered.
I guess in the context, I guess, of just general education, you're preparing teachers to go out into the workforce so that they will hopefully foster a same sort of mindset here in terms of what we're preparing the students for at the K-12. I think that apparatus kind of links right back down in those the same frames. You've got civic, college, and career readiness, I guess, if you think about what's the focus at that K-12 level, which is what generally the University of Prep is preparing people to go and engage with. And it's around those general eyes of ideas of making these students or these teachers that will be there able to foster inquiry among students such that they're going to be equipped with the tools and the knowledge that they can be self-learners and engaged active participants in society.
And to do it at an early age. That's what K-12 has the opportunity to do, is that we can impact children. And let's get a presidential campaign going in kindergarten. And that it'll be a killer. But to get them thinking,
Yep.
we have the opportunity to be the children.
The public purpose in EXL.
Well, I was just thinking about all the e-portfolios, because I usually have about 100 students a semester that are in the EXL Scholars Program. And looking at those capstone e-portfolios, you would be so proud, because so many of them, by the time they're to that point and they've done enough and they've thought about it and reflected on it, and by the time they get to that point, they really understand their civic mission and that they are out to change the world. I mean, it's really amazing to see that. So I think between the service learning course and the e-portfolio capstone course that I do, it's across every major. I can see that.
Well, I will throw in my support statement here for, in terms of the high impact practices that are available to us on this campus. We certainly can EXL into one of our courses. We can create a learning community with a partner faculty member. These are all ways to lift the dialogue in practical ways. We have these tools right here with us, and for us not to employ them, they are extra work, is our putting our head in our sand. Poli-sci, once again, I would presume your public purpose is perfectly obvious.
You think so, but then politicians are very happy to tell us that we don't serve a public purpose. I mean, it's educating students about, if we're gonna talk about democracy, which I'll admit that I like it a lot. It's not only teaching students about our democracy and the reasons why we created it, but to think about like other democracies that exist and understand what were the factors that influence those different institutional designs, transitions to democracy, and what are the struggles, especially for new democracies, to become mature and thrive and be part of kind of the more systematic system of democratic states. That I think it's not just about having, it is in part having the local perspective and history and understanding, but then I actually wrote down what you said at the start of the thing about like democracy or always being under
construction, it's, I think that's what we're always bringing in is, thinking like this is not a fixed system, but rather one that's, constantly being challenged and changing and, part of choice, and choice comes from political action, so.
And that responsibility piece is, at MTSU, we obviously tied in a big true blue that's being responsible for our education. That's what MT engages about. We engage in our work, but, we have to take it that we're engaging in the well-being of the society around us. Dance, your public purpose?
We also communication, but nonverbal communication, awareness of one's own body in relationship to other people in space. In the performing arts, we certainly reflect back socially, relationship structures. The artwork that we create and put on stage allows people an opportunity, to observe ourselves as social beings, and we can do that in a way that's, either challenging norms or working within accepted cultural norms. Creativity, teaching people how to create and to envision a different kind of world.
If we are a university with very high marks in terms of our civic health, it means that we have fostered a civic ethos across all parts of the campus and our educational culture. We've made civic literacy a core expectation for all students in every program, every course, every department. We're practicing civic inquiry across all fields of study, and we're advancing civic action through transformative partnerships at home and abroad. And key recommendations by AAC and you for our educational leaders are to make civic learning for democratic engagement an expected component of program integrity and quality standards at all levels, and make demonstrated achievement in civic learning, U.S. and global, an integral part of what we do and accountability within our university. Those are strong marching orders, but in order to make one's campus reflective of these values and virtues, not partially, but pervasively, therein lies the rub. That's where the rubber hits the road for all of us. It's like, how partial is it at MTSU? And to compare and contrast what a partial foundation would look like as opposed to how civic learning would become pervasive across campus. Just reading from the board, civic learning is optional if it's partial, civic learning is expected if it's pervasive. Civic learning is a one-time experience. Again, it's that issue of high impact practices being one or two. If they're getting it from poli-sci only, they're not getting it in every single course across the university, as opposed to infusing civic learning in students' educational experience over time within every program that exists. Teaching critical thinking does not consider real-world context. Conversely, teaching critical thinking is about a relationship to problems of public significance. Civic learning is individually oriented as opposed to the collaboration with diverse peoples, respecting that democratic engagement piece is about reciprocity, not top-down, which is what our students love to do, because we get this model from our churches. It's philanthropy. We love to give to the poor. Our students love to put on a concert, collect money, and give it away to somebody who needs it, and that's great. We all want Bill Gates shedding some of his love in our direction. But conversely, the notion of working collaboratively and democratically is a different challenge, and I think it's honestly, I think it's a hard one for our kids to get. Faculty in some disciplines and some programs raise civic questions, as opposed to faculty in all disciplines raise these civic questions. There's a challenge for us going back to our departments. Community-based scholarship is accepted. I do think it's accepted at our university, but is it positively rewarded within our tenure and promotion criteria at MTSU? Do all of the folks who hold the power and the full tenure and the full professorships in our departments say, absolutely, that's where we need to be going? And those are question marks for a fully engaged campus. Civic learning practices in the curriculum and co-curriculum activities parallel but not integrated. I think, frankly, that's something we have yet to work on here at MTSU. Often we are operating in silos, and the more we integrate these programs from curricular into co-curricular parts of the university, the stronger it is an experience for our students. Community engagement is one directional. Community engagement is reciprocal. Again, this is a hard piece for us as well, because we all, through our disciplines, love to go out and help communities. We want to give it to them. It's a hard lesson, I think, for each of us individually and then as a university about how we act in reciprocal in terms of community engagement. And mission and vision statements are broader. They are about civic responsibility, and they address it very, very keenly and clearly. And we continue to work on all of these, but the more each of us takes them back to our own departments and is explicit and intentional about it, the more we're embedding this and making it institutionalized across the university. So where do we go from here, and what can each of us do back in our own programs, in our own classes, and in our own departments?
Let's continue the conversation, please, after we leave here. And you can be in touch with us in this continued conversation with each other, with your colleagues. But thank you for being here today. And, you know, Mary and I talked and said, you know what, if you want to keep this going, then you initiate contact with us and we'll keep it going. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but anyway, it's in your hands now.
Well, we can send out these handouts and contact information in the next few
Yeah,
days.
you had, you did for these last.
Okay, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
And we did have several faculty that wanted to be here and they're teaching and they asked to record it, so you may hear from some others.
All right.